Juliet, I'm just letting people in now.
Okay.
I'm going to take myself off the video for a few minutes. I have to give myself a breathing treatment.
Okay, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
All right, thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, hello, greetings, greetings.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey.
And I apologize. I'm in my car driving, but I'm stationary right now. So if I turn the camera back off, it's because I'm driving. But I'm still listening.
All right, but please be safe.
I will.
Okay, the meeting will start in 2 minutes and we're live on YouTube. Bridget, can I put the agenda up?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, where's my agenda?
Diane, you all want to make in, Tiffany, did y'all want to make any comments before we put the agenda up? I just thought about that. Okay.
My screen sharing is not working. What is going on here?
Juliet, mine is working, so it should work for you. And you want to take, why don't you go back, take that back off so you could take all those paragraphs off, that setting off.
Okay, let me try it one more time. 6 o'clock.
So you got all, the view that you look at your stuff, you have all the paragraphs.
Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, much better.
Okay. Co-chair, 6 o'clock, 6:01.
Okay, so we will dive right in. That's okay with everyone? Is there a comment there? Well, welcome. I'll go ahead.
So I was just sharing with Juliet that to get rid of the other documents that's on your screen.
On my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
And for everyone attending, thank you for joining us at this second Affordable Housing Implementation Committee meeting. This is our April 15th meeting, and we will get started. A quick note prior to diving in, staff has unmuted all of the committee members. Because of how this Zoom was set up, the last one was set up as a webinar and this one is set up differently. So all of the committee members, you have control of muting and unmuting yourself. Staff has unmuted you. So when you're not speaking, if you would please keep yourself muted. At roll call, you'll need to unmute yourself, say present, and then mute yourself back, if that's all right. But we will move straight into roll call.
Tiffany Diane Cantati,
Present?
Here.
Tiffany Elder,
Here?
Stella Adams, Lavon Barnes. He stated he will be joining late today. Laura Betty. Can you unmute Miss Betty?
Hi, everybody.
Thank you. Lucida Constantine. Am I pronouncing that right?
It's Lucia Constantine, present.
Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Constantine. Sorry about that.
No worries.
S. Nicole Diggs,
Present.
Tammy Farrell, Nicole Furness,
Present.
Courtney James,
Here.
I. Jarvis Martin, Rita Aura McDaniel,
Present.
Don Parker,
Present.
Venice. Did I get it right, Miss Sanders? Venice.
Venus Sanders,
Venus.
present.
Okay, you Miss Sanders from me from now on, okay?
That's okay. Just think of the planet when you see my
I'm
name.
trying. Timothy
okay.
Stallman. Timothy Stallman. Angela Vick Lewis.
Present.
That's the end of roll call.
Right, and I believe we have two individuals, a committee member and a staff member to add to the introductions from the last meeting. So if Lucia Constantine, if I said that correctly, and Terry Porter Holmes could very briefly, 1 minute each, state your name and share your connection or interest in the topic of affordable housing.
I can start. I'm Lucia Constantine. I've lived in Durham for the past 5 years. And I joined this committee because I know that housing shapes health, education, everything. And I currently work for the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, which is the entity that administers the tax credit.
Good evening. My name is Terry Porter Holmes. I am one of the other assistant directors in the Community Development Department. My area is the fiscal side of the house, planning, performance, and administration.
Thank you and welcome, everyone. At this point, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the April 1, 2021 Affordable Housing Implementation Committee.
I recommend.
Sorry? Would someone like to move the minutes, or are there any comments on the minutes? Sorry, as presented.
Excuse me, this is Anthony Scott. One comment. It's listing Anthony Sneed. It should be Anthony Snell under the Durham Housing Authority. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, would someone like to move to approve the minutes with that correction?
I move that we approve the minutes with the one correction.
Thank you, Rita. Is there a second?
I second.
Angela, thank you very much. Any opposed? Okay, could everybody unmute and say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the motion carries, no one said opposed, so the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And now back to you, Tiffany.
For the unmute. So right now we will review the agenda. You should see it on your screen. Well, actually, we can leave the ground rules there. I'll run through the agenda very quickly. After covering ground rules, we'll move to the communications plan update from Moss and Ross and French West Vaughan. We'll then cover the DHA downtown and neighborhood plan. Durham Housing Authority staff will cover that. The affordable housing plan by community development, and the MWBE plan update by community development as well. There will be a short moment for committee discussion following that, and then we will have our wrap up and meeting schedule for upcoming meetings. So for ground rules, we'll run through these as well, and there are a couple things that I'd like to point out. First, please show respect for others and their opinions, of course. Always presume goodwill. Be fully present. One speaker at a time. For our virtual calls, only the speaker will be unmuted to eliminate background noise. All participants will remain muted until called upon. Committee members can raise their hand to speak. And in today's meeting, if we are able to keep on schedule, after each presentation, there will be space for 1 to 2 questions from the committee members. If you have the functionality in the Zoom session that you're using, if you can raise your hand, there's a function for action or reactions at the bottom of your screen. If you can raise your hand to let staff know that you have a question, we'll have time for 1 or 2 after each presentation. Beyond that, any questions that you have, if you can hold them until we get to the discussion period after all of the presentations are completed. Public comment is not anticipated at the initial meetings, and comments in the chat will be reviewed and addressed as feasible between meetings. And we do want to note it is quite difficult during these meetings to monitor the chat. So we will be looking at questions at the end of the meeting. And if there's time, reviewing at that time. We will work on reviewing any questions that aren't covered during the meeting, and we'll follow up on these. And one example of that is during the first meeting, there was a request for an acronyms list to be posted, and that will be posted on the community development site. I did see a copy of that circulated, so you will have access to an acronyms list very soon. And please use specific examples. And of course, enjoy the process. The purpose of these meetings is to give you more information into the affordable housing plan and its key components. And we look forward to participating in that with you. So next we will move right into the communications plans update by Moss and Ross and French West Vaughan.
Great, thank you, Tiffany. I think I'm unmuted now. Glad to be here, everybody. My name is Susan Ross. I'm Durham resident, Durham native, and proud co-owner of Moss and Ross. I want to introduce the team from Moss and Ross and French West Vaughan who are on the call. As many of you know, because many of you are part of our work along the way, we've been engaged for about more than half a year now on this project anyway. And so let me start by introducing the Moss and Ross part of the team. Jean Murray, maybe you should say something so you light up, Jean.
Hi, everyone. Jean Murray.
Jean is the project manager on this for Moss and Ross, and Kimberly Moore.
Good evening, everyone.
Glad to have Kimberly here. Patrice Nelson was the other part of our team who is not here tonight. Patrice is part of Moss and Ross and was part of many of the work, much of the work we did along the way. There's a group of folks from French West Vaughan who are very involved along the way. I want to introduce Jenny Paluski, who is one of the bosses over there. Jenny, can you say hi?
Hi, everyone. Jenny.
Jenny, and she had many folks from her side on this. I don't think anybody else is on tonight, are they, Jenny?
Just myself, yes.
Okay, great. You will be hearing a lot more from French Westbourne along the way. The two firms got started. We're going to show you some slides here now. Thank you. Our process here was to listen hard, bring together the strategy, roll out a process that led to goals for getting this plan and key messages out the door. And we want to talk through what the next steps are with you. So that's what we're going to try to do tonight. We were contacted along with a lot of other people back in last summer, and the city City Economic Development Group, the Community Development Group had divided the task into two parts, task 1 and 2. Our client team was Reginald, Karen, Beverly, Terry, Anthony, and Ray from DHA in the city. And we did 22 different discovery interviews and listening sessions, all of which are included in Appendix B for the report that you will have. Our immediate action from the listening sessions was to see that something had to be done right away about the website, which was woefully out of date. And some of you pointed out to us that it still said, "We hope the bond passes." So it was time to update that. So we did get some quick updates done that noted that the bond did indeed pass. And then we are now working on the next steps, was to get a new website up and at 'em. During the plan development, it became obvious that we needed, you can go to that next slide if you don't mind. I'm sorry, I didn't realize we hadn't moved. So the scope of work was develop the communications plan and create the infrastructure to make it happen. And we had regular meetings along the way. So the listening sessions were step 1, November, December of last year. In January, we got the new website rolling. February, March, we have finalized the plan and had approval just today. Thank you, Reginald, from the city. And along the way, it became clear that it was time to get started with task 2 and get so that it wouldn't be late next summer before things started coming out that people want to see. People needed to see this. And we'll talk a little bit later about what we've done in task 2 so far and what we will be doing. The communications plan that was a result of this, edited by Jean, is 25 pages long with 5 appendices. And so you all can plow through the 37 pages of that. Your chairs have seen it, and we've had a chance to talk with them a little bit more about it. But I'd like to start by introducing Kimberly, who's going to go through the goals that were established during this.
Thank you so much, Susan. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. You could turn to the next slide, please. Thank you. So Susan alluded to our 22 group and individual interviews, but I would just provide a little bit more detail. We talked to about 60 people between the group interviews and the one-on-ones. So we want you to know that this plan truly was a collaborative effort. And we really considered part of our role to be to provide a feedback loop for you, the Affordable Housing Implementation Committee. We had an amazing kickoff interview, background interview with your chairs. They were very gracious to hear our questions before we even really started. So I want to thank them personally for that. It really provided a lot of shape for us. And I think it really spoke to how we were building trust from the very beginning. So our goals for this communications plan were to inform, to engage, and build trust. And we were able to do that from the outset. The information piece of this really spoke to, again, just like Susan mentioned, the website was, considered to be out of date. And we wanted to get some quick information up there so people could see, yes, progress is happening. And all of the information we're sharing is to equip the stakeholder groups. But just as important, we want to equip you. The folks on this phone or this Zoom are going to be really these chief spokespeople, the chief ambassadors about what's going on in affordable housing in Durham. And we wanted you to have a place to get all the information and a content hub that is responsive and gives you the most current and up-to-date statistics. So that is one of our primary goals, to inform everyone, but you all specifically. When applicable, we're going to use that information goal to Tell about adjustments. One thing we heard loud and clear, if we're missing the timeline, if we're missing one of our deliverables, let people know. They understand things happen. Case in point, who knew we would be dealing with COVID when this bond was passed? No one knew that. But if we're transparent and we let people know COVID is going to affect our timelines in this way, again, the 60 people we talked to said, just let us know, just keep us informed. So that was the first goal. Second goal was to engage. Some of the interviews that I personally conducted were with a lot of residents, and they were absolutely, you can imagine, very engaged on their platforms about what's going on in affordable housing. So guess what? Even though the website was out of date, the Facebook group for some of the communities you all are familiar with were not out of date. They're very current. So we want to keep that engagement. And through this plan, we feel that we can equip you guys to do that. We encourage feedback. We want to encourage you to look for opportunities to discuss this plan, to discuss what you're doing, guide community members to the information. And we all agree that digital is important. This website is important, but to truly keep the community engaged, we're going to have to go beyond that. We're going to have to be in the Facebook group. We're going to have to be on Instagram. We're going to have to be in the community, knocking on doors. And some of our tactics and strategies that French West Bond is going to work on will help equip you all to do just that. So engagement was really clear. We heard that often. And finally, the last goal, building trust. As I said from the outset, Tiffany and Diane were very gracious to answer our questions. And we had some pretty pointed questions, and they were, honest with us about the answers. So we want to continue that throughout this process. There are going to be long timelines. I'm telling you something you already know. Development, real estate development takes months. It takes years in some cases. And these long timelines have progress and milestones along the way. We want to build trust by telling our audiences, this is where we are. These are the RFPs we've issued. These are the folks who got jobs. We want to tell those stories, not just in quantitative data. We all are familiar with those charts, all of our reporting. We want to tell stories. We want to show pictures. We have a need to make these stories come alive because, quite frankly, even though they're units, we all know there's a life behind every one of these housing units. And we want to share that. So those are the 3 goals for our communications plan. Next, you will hear more about the messaging from Jean.
Thanks, Kimberly. Juliet, the next slide, please. Thank you. So in developing the plan, we distilled the communication into 5 key messages. And we're going to use this messaging in all of the outreach on the website, the materials, etc. And we really gleaned this not only from the interview process, but also from understanding the materials that were developed for the bond program. So the first one is that this program improves housing affordability for renters and homeowners. We really do need to communicate the breadth of this program, that it responding to low and moderate income levels. It's in neighborhoods. It's for a range of individuals and families, those experiencing homelessness, first-time home buyers, current homeowners. It's a range of housing affordability. So we want to make sure that we're communicating that breadth. The second is that this is a $160 million investment over multiple years, and that there are additional investments that are sparked by this investment. This is a complex picture, but we need to make it easy to understand that it's actually spurring $443 million in private funding, and including $130 million in contracting opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses. So the catalyst is the $160 million, but the impact in Durham is over $600 million. So we want to make sure that people are understanding that this is part of that's why the word investment was in the bond program. Thirdly, that the city is making real progress on these goals. Both Susan and Kimberly alluded to this, that during our interview process, it became clear to us that people didn't know that progress was being made that the funding was already was being allocated, spending commitments are underway, and progress can be seen. So progress on longer term housing construction is, years down the road, but there are key indicators such as RFPs issues, contracts signed, et cetera. So we want to make sure that our communications tell that story as well. In addition, a lot of the services have been underway since day one, and those stories can be told. The fourth message regards the partnerships. So there are many partners for the city in this program. DHA is a very important partner. It's not the only partner, but it's the biggest partner. So their role in improving and expanding affordable rental housing is critical, and we need to be able to explain that simply about how the $160 million investment and the commitment from the city to the DHA program, in particular, the DHA Downtown and Neighborhood Plan, the DDNP, is the catalyst for creating those kinds of investments. So we want to make sure that people understand the role of DHA in this and that there are many other partners, which brings me to the final message, which is Durham is in this together. This is going to have a significant impact on housing affordability. It's a catalyst for more investment in our community. The reason the bond passed was because of our community's desire for a better Durham, and that's what propels this vision. So we want to make sure that in the same spirit as your ground rules about this is something that we're all doing together, Durham is doing this together. And so we want to infuse our messaging with that kind of spirit that everyone is in this together. So now I'll introduce Jenny Paluski to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing in terms of implementation.
Okay, you have 4 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Jean. And you can go to the last slide. We may have one more after that, but it's just a closing slide. So yes, this one here. I'll just give you a quick update of where we are in the progress. With the foresight of both Karen and Reginald, and together as a group, we all agreed before we were really final on the plan, we really just needed to get started because we knew enough of what was needed in terms of informing the community as early as possible. So we got to quick work on developing the website itself, which number one in that process was ensuring that we could come up with a name. What can we call this program that's memorable, that's recognizable by the community, and that captures really the intent and the purpose and the mission of it. So Forever Home Durham, affordable, livable, inclusive. That will be a program name that will be used on all materials going forward. We are starting to roll that out in certain materials now. So we have just a couple of weeks ago now had Reginald and Anthony on an episode of City Life hosted by Beverly Thompson. And so that was a first step in getting faces out, talking very specifically, educating, getting some of the messaging that Jean overviewed in a consumable format. We will feature content such as that on the website, again, for education and trust building. We will also have an FAQ section on the site, which starts to really help distill down some of the terms and meanings and definitions of things, which we, as Jean and Kimberly said before, one of our biggest challenges is taking a complex subject and making it very simplified and digestible. And we'll also, we don't have a visual here, but we are working on signage as well. So all over the community, we'll be making sure this Forever Home Durham stamp starts to show up and help people understand when they're driving by or understanding what projects are in place, what's helping fund those to help show progress as well.
Great, thank you. I think the last slide, Juliet, as Jenny said, is just a closer. So we should be right on time. This is your team. We will continue to be working on this. We are getting started underway with task 2, part 2 next, and we'll be keeping you apprised, and we'll be grateful for your assistance and your communicating a good message out to our neighbors.
Perfect, thank you. to the Moss and Ross and French West Bond team for that. We do have just a couple minutes in case there are any questions from within the implementation committee.
I have a question to know, you talked about wanting to tell stories, and I understand it's very convenient. Anthony's speaking, but what about the resident story? What about the stories of the residents who are going to be temporarily dislocated and then relocating in a really nice in the process? Is there a budget for it?
Should I take that one?
Jenny, take that. Yeah.
Yes, there is. And we've included that in our content development for the website. So we will be speaking to a range of people who are benefiting from the program, including residents, and featuring them in the storytelling section of the website.
Great. Keep it up.
Thanks, John.
Any other questions?
There's a question in the chat about will Durham be eligible for another housing bond in the future? I think that's out over my pay grade, but one of the things we want to be sure is that the communication is strong enough in this, how we're spending this bond money, that the public would vote yes when we get a chance to vote again.
We will now move to the DHA Downtown and Neighborhood Plan.
I had a question too. Sorry, I thought we were supposed to raise our hand.
Okay, yeah, we have time for 1 or 2 questions after each presentation, and then we're going to have a full committee conversation afterwards.
I'll save it for later.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. We'll be back in touch with you.
Thank you. And we're now moving to Downtown Durham, Downtown and Neighborhood Plan, DHA staff.
Excellent, thank you. I'll start by introducing some staff members. So Anthony Snell is our Director of Development. Anthony, if you could say something so they could see a box light up or something. And Alicia Curry is the other staff member. She's a project manager on most of the DDMP sites. So next slide, please. So tonight I wanted to take an opportunity to very quickly go over DDMP because you've heard this before. We heard it at the last presentation, but just to sort of ground you in terms of our discussions tonight, talk about our unit mix, affordability mix, and then demolition and relocation plan, and a little bit about the ownership structures. Next, please. So again, you guys are familiar with this map showing our various sites. We have a total of 7 different sites that are included in the plan, which includes 2 sites from the city and 1 site from the county. Next slide, please. But I also thought it was important just to indicate how many units are where. So of these sites, there are really four different sites that have existing units on them that totals to 447 units. So it's 214 on the East Main Street and Liberty Street site, 106 for the 519 East Main, and 108 at the Liberty Street apartment, 55 units at Forest Hill Heights, and 178 units at JJ Henderson. Next, please. And again, this shows you the various sites that are going to be developed on those, the various properties, I should say, that are going to be developed on those sites. And next slide. And this is the estimated number of units for each of those various sites. Next slide, please. Within this overall plan, we are projecting about 2,500 units, a full budget of about $532 million, 17 different phases. And 10 of those phases include the 9% low-income housing tax credits. Those are competitive, so there is no guarantee that we will get those 9% credits in any given year that we apply. We applied and received an award for the first site on the Liberty and Main Street property. But the year before, we applied for the new construction side of JJ Henderson, and we were not successful in winning an award. We did apply for another 9% application this year. Actually, it went in just a couple of, it's due in the middle of May. And hopefully we're successful there, and that'll be phase 2. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But basically, you can see we have about a 10-year build out plan for this in terms of getting started on all of our work. The pandemic did actually delay us about a year, or contributed, I should say, to the delay. So we're about a year behind from this original schedule that came out in 2019. And one other thing I want to point out is that you see the estimated units and the budgets, as well as the phases. All of those are subject to change over time. So each time we engage a separate phase within these development sites, we will have a new plan, a new number of units, et cetera, that we expect to happen. And I'll show you some practical examples about this if in fact that has already occurred, that has changed these numbers that you see. But I put this up because this is showing you what we presented in 2019 as our estimated number of units and budgets, as well as phases. Next slide, please. This is our projected affordability and bedroom mix. And again, when you look at the 30% AMI public housing units, there'll be no change in that number of units. There will still be 447 units that we will have in place at the end of the day from this. So that number is not going to change. When it gets to the 30 to 60% units, the 60 to 80, the market rate units, those numbers can be flexible depending on what type of deal that we do at a given phase and at a given time. But these percentages overall, in terms of the total number of units, will be very close to that that we have estimated right now. Next slide, please. So now I want to get into more specifics. Again, we're going to start with JJ Henderson, both the new construction and the renovation. Next, please. So as you all are aware, we are doing a renovation of the existing JJ Henderson building. It'll be 177 units. And we're building a new construction 80-unit building next to it. Both of these sites will be for seniors. And both of these sites are starting construction within the next 30 days. So we're very excited about getting this phase off the ground. But the one thing I'll say, I mentioned earlier that the JJ Henderson New Construction was a 9% tax credit application, but it was not successful. We were able to get additional funding from the city to make up the gap, and we were able to continue with the development of the new construction site. That will not be the case going forward, that we'll be able to make that change. The difference between a 4 and a 9% with this new construction site was relatively speaking rather small. Still a big lift for us, but it was relatively small to make the adjustment. The key was, because this is one physical site that's having 2 buildings on it, it is important for us. It was important for us to be able to have these happen at the same time because their infrastructure is tied together. Next slide, please. This is a rendering of the JJ Henderson New Construction site. In the 80 units, again, 70 are 1-bedrooms, 10 are going to be 2 bedrooms. Construction start should be in the next 60 days at the most. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to drill in a little bit more about the East Main Street and Liberty Street apartments. Next slide. So this is the overall site plan. At the top right, you see what the site looks like currently. The larger sort of drawing that you see there shows you what the plans are for that site. You'll notice by the numbers, the 1As, 1B, 2A, 3, 4B, A, C, all of those. So this is actually broken up into 5 different phases. And if you recall from the slide previously, when we had the plan, it actually had 3 phases. But once we brought our developer on board and they began to do the work and get down to the nitty gritty, if they say, they came up with a plan that was a little different than what we had projected. The good news about that is that their plan ended up adding additional 30 units, I believe, because we had about 530 units, I believe, and they ended up with 555. They had a plan that was even higher, but because of some other adjustments we needed to make, In terms of having larger bedroom sizes, we ended up with fewer units. But that's a great example of what I mean in terms of once we actually engage a developer and they look at the market in terms of where it is now, they look at the financing that's available, they put together the plans to go forward, then our plans will adjust and change some. So I make that point because I do a lot of these types of presentations and I put a lot of information out. We always try to make that information public. You will see some slight changes and differences with where we started and where we are now. But in all cases, those changes and differences, we expect them to be for the better and not something that's going to be less than what we initially proposed. In the original plan, we made it clear as we reached out to development partners that what we projected as a number of units is the minimum of what we'd like to see. We expect and ask that they come back with plans that give us more units and more creativity, more amenities than what we had projected to begin with. So that's always going to be our push. And so far with our development partner, we've seen that they've been able to deliver on those demands for more rather than less, or even just what we asked for. Next slide, please. This is a little bit more of a breakdown of how those 5 phases will in fact be, how the unit breakdown will look, and also the types of financing that we're looking to do. Both phase 1 and 2, which Elizabeth Street has already been funded by 9% tax credit application. As I said, the construction, or actually the demolition, is going to be starting in the next 30 to 60 days on the existing property. And I'll talk a little bit about the demolition plan shortly. And we've applied now, we applied for the preliminary. The final application for Commerce Street will go in for 9% in next month when they are due. That'll be 84 units. Commerce Street Senior only is going to be 88 units, and there's looking at doing some private financing for that. And then on the east side, phases 4 and 5, you see a total of 311 units with a combination of family and workforce housing. Plus, phase 5 is the portion that's on Main Street. So there would be purposely some retail commercial space that'll be located within that development. Next slide, please.
You have 5 minutes.
Okay, I should be fine. And then next here, you see the relocation and phasing strategy. And this is important for folks to see how we're looking to handle the people that are currently on the site and how we're looking to transition them while we do this construction work. Elizabeth Street Apartments is the first, in which we are tearing down 8 buildings, which is a total of 36 units. 8 of those are going to be, 18 of those are going to be RAD units. 54 are going to be non-RAD units for a total of 72 units for that site. And you can see what the breakdown is for the rest. Next slide, please. This is now, I'm going to walk you through sort of the demolition plan. So I mentioned that there were 8 buildings that are going to be demolished. There'll be 36 units. And the outline you see are what makes up those units. Of those 36 units, currently 22 are occupied. 7 families will be moving from this site to the Willard Street Apartments that is recently opened up. 8 families have moved to Laurel Oaks Apartments. 5 are going to be on-site transfers to other units within the site. And then we have 2 that have relocated to other DHA sites. Now, one thing I'll say about the 5 families that are on site, we really don't want to have people have to move twice, because we know in future years, we're going to need to move those families again as we move to other phases of demolition. But those families wanted to stay on that site, recognizing that they'd have to move again in a few more years. Next slide, please. So this is what that first phase would look like in plan. Next slide will take you to the next demolition component. Oh, sorry, before that, this is a rendering. You saw this last time, showing you what that Elizabeth Street Apartments will look like. Next slide. So this slide kind of shows you a little bit about AMI. Director Johnson talked about this last time around, but I wanted to break this down a little bit more specifically for the Elizabeth Street Apartments. There are 72 units in total. 18 of those units are going to be essentially replacement public housing units on site. 30 of those units will be up to 60% of area median income. 24 of those units will be up to 80% of area median income. And remember what I talked about before, that the whole point of us doing these mixed income developments going forward is to make sure that we have a stronger financial footing for those developments in the future, so that we'll have more revenue coming in. We can make sure that we can take care of our repairs. We can make sure that we can handle our major capital items, because we'll have enough revenue coming in throughout the life of that building. Next slide, please. Now we're moving to the next phase of demolition. Next, please. So you'll see the second phase, which is currently being called the Commerce Street Apartments. And then also there's space for the third phase. Next slide, please. So this is the Commerce Street Apartments plan at this point. And then the next slide shows you what phase 3 would look like. And then finally, next slide, showing you the third phase of demolition that will take place, which will be the 8 buildings, total 152 units. Right now, which 121 of those are occupied. And next slide will show you what that build out would look like. Next slide as well. That's phase 4. This is phase 5. All right, next slide, please. So there are 214 units on that East Main Street and Liberty Street apartment site. This is how those units are looking to be relocated throughout that downtown area. Remember the commitment that DHA has, that no units that are within that dotted line are going to be moved outside of that dotted line. So these are the plans for how we're going to diversify some of our public housing units, but still be within this footprint. At the very top, you see the 21 units at Willard Street, which is already built and in place and people are moving in. And then you see there'll be 87 units that'll be replaced on the existing site. There'll be 22 units that'll be at 300 East Main Street, which is directly across the street from the current DHA office. That's the site that the county is developing. There's another 28 units that DHA, that'll be at the DHA rebuild of its office space, which will now be all apartments. There'll be 36 units at the 500 block, which is literally across the street from the existing building. And then there'll be 20 units that are going to be in the new J.J. Henderson construction that's going on. So as we move to each site that we're going to do redevelopment on, we're going to have to do a similar plan of how we're going to replace the units that are there. If we don't bring them all back to the same site, they're going elsewhere. We have to have a plan that shows where those units are going to go. And HUD will not allow us to move forward unless we have a concrete plan in which to replace each and every one of those units.
Okay, 1 minute.
Next slide, please.
1 minute.
Thank you. So a little bit about ownership structure. Sometimes people ask about DHA selling their properties and what's going to happen. It's not that we're selling their properties and we're walking away. It's actually a partnership between us and the development partner that we bring in. That development partner is bringing to the table their development expertise and their financial guarantees. And at some point, anywhere from 5 to 15 years, we have an option to buy that partner out down the road. The other piece to this that's really, really important, you heard me talk about tax credits. The tax credits create something called a limited equity investor. That is, their sole role is to come in and buy those credits for their own benefit, but they don't have any direct role in the operations of our sites. They're only as a financial investor for that tax credit opportunity, and that's it. The only reason they would ever step in is if there's something was going wrong within the property, and their sole role would be to step in and get somebody else to run the property the way it is supposed to run. And then lastly, the proceeds from the sale of those tax credits becomes the equity into that development deal. So in other words, it helps bring cash money into the deal that helps them remain affordable. And I believe that's my last slide. Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And with the goal of keeping us on schedule, if the committee can hold questions until the committee discussions later on in this meeting, that would be great. And we can now move to the affordable housing plan. by Community Development Department.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Reginald Johnson, Director, Department of Community Development. Ms. Karen Lotto, the Assistant Director of Community Development, will be making this presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. So the purpose of this presentation is to kind of take a step back now that you've heard about what we are doing, and we're doing both as community development and in partnership with the Housing Authority, and give you the big picture, the overview of what is the overall Forever Home Durham investment program. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, the Forever Home program is a $160 million investment in affordable housing and services for low-income Durham residents. It's funded out of two large ways. The first is the $95 million affordable housing bond that was approved last November 19. And the second is $65 million in revenue that the city either has in hand or anticipates because they are annual allocations either from city sources or from funds that we receive from the federal government and specifically the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Next slide. This is the overall program. And I know this slide is hard to read. So just really want to focus you on the big colored categories. These were the large categories that were proposed in the program that was taken to the voters. The first was to invest in homelessness. And I'll talk a little bit about more of these in detail. And one of the important things to note, we cannot, for example, use bond funds to invest in most homeless activities because bond funds have to be used for construction. But the availability of bond funds for construction allows us to take other funding and really increase our activity in the area of homeless services. So the areas of activity are homelessness, multifamily rental, both with the Durham Housing Authority and with other partners, neighborhood stabilization, what we call financing pilots, which really are ways of using city money to create debt products that solve certain problems. And then the program operations, that's the backbone of the Community Development Department and how we actually manage these programs. So next slide. So what are we proposing to do? In the area of homelessness, the focus really is to continue to build and strengthen the homeless housing system. And you'll hear us talk a lot about the homeless housing system. And by that, we mean the network of providers, often called the continuum of care, that work together under a common set of policies and a set of adopted priorities about how we allocate our resources to provide housing and services to Durham residents that are experiencing homelessness. This system, this Durham Homelessness Continuum of Care, which is this collaborative of agencies, is overseen by a governing board called the Homeless Services Advisory Committee, which you'll hear us talk over the next years more about. As part of what we're trying to do in strengthening the homeless housing system, what we're really trying to focus on is strengthening the implementation of what we call the housing first philosophy. The housing first approach is really the belief and the knowledge that we have taken from a lot of data on outcomes of different homeless systems, that the most effective way to address the needs of people experiencing homelessness is to provide housing first, get them into housing, permanent housing, to end their homelessness, because that housing then serves as a platform for people then to be able to engage in services and maybe deal with their mental health crisis or their substance abuse or their job situation, or whatever it is that they are facing as an individual or as a household. And so it moves us away from thinking about getting people ready for housing in a transitional model and then moving them into permanent housing, but rather focusing and saying, we need to move people into permanent housing because our data tell us, pretty compellingly from across the country, that this is the most successful way to stabilize people. And finally, in order to do this, we really need to strengthen and streamline that network that we're talking about, that homeless, the continuum of care and its governance body, the Homeless Services Advisory Committee. Next slide. Just to give you a little idea of what the homeless system means when we're talking about it, this is a graphic that we'll probably come back to a bit over the coming years. imagine our Durham resident who is experiencing a housing crisis. They may on their own go to Entry Point Durham, which is the front door of the homeless system. That's where you go and you say, I'm having a housing crisis and I need help. And the folks who answer the phone or in other times, are at the desk, try to, either help you resolve your housing crisis, place you into emergency shelter, or find you another housing option. Sometimes those folks come to us because we have what are called street outreach workers, that oval at the bottom, who are really reaching out to people who are living, in their cars or in tents and things like that, trying to connect them to services. The goal when you get to Entry Point is either to get some counseling and help to immediately resolve your housing crisis and get you right back into housing, or if not, to bring you into resources, either to connect you to a permanent housing resource or to a temporary emergency shelter, and from there to a permanent housing resource. So that's really the goal, is always get you into housing, make your homelessness as short as possible. And underpinning that whole system is what we call the Homeless Management Information System, which is our data platform of people coming through the system. So next slide. Multifamily rental. We've really talked a lot about this already. One big area of investment is our support for DHA's Downtown Neighborhood Plan, which you've heard Mr. Scott talk about. We also provide funding for multifamily rental projects citywide, and that's both new construction as well as preservation of projects. And that can be preservation of projects that are already affordable, and we're just trying to keep them affordable because they've gotten older and they need to be rehabbed and improved. Or we have folks who are trying to take properties that maybe are, a market rate apartment building, it's serving a lower income demographic. We can buy it, we can rehab it, we can put income restrictions on it, and we can keep it affordable long-term. Next slide. This is just a little brief deviation to really talk about, and this applies to for sale as well as rental, but the example here is rental. Really to kind of remind folks why the city, because what the city does typically with our money, we are what's called a gap funder or a subsidy provider. We're filling that gap that cannot be covered by other funding sources, and in particular can't be covered by debt. And so just to give you an idea of why this has to happen, if you look at the graph to the left, that's a typical project, that typical market rate development. In that case, the developer's financial model is that they are going to use the rental income that they are going to get to pay the operating expenses on the building and to pay the mortgage and their equity investors and to give them a return because they have a big enough operating stream to do that. Well, when we get to the affordable project, we have the same cost to build the building and run it, but we have a smaller rental income stream because we're trying to keep our rents low. So what that does is it opens up a gap on the project. And that gap is filled in a lot of different ways. You heard Mr. Scott talk about low-income housing tax credits. That's a very important tool. The city and the funding that we provide is another source of gap funding. Next slide. The third main area that we're going to be working is in the area of what we call neighborhood stabilization. And in this area, really, we have both people activities and unit activities. The people activities are really focused on trying to keep existing homeowners and renters in their homes. And that might be, we fund eviction diversion and expanding our funding for eviction diversion to help renters avoid eviction. We are funding and increasing our funding for repair and rehabilitation of owner-occupied homes, particularly for elderly and disabled homeowners, with the goal of letting those homeowners stay in their units as long as possible. And we are trying to expand our work in the area of property tax assistance. Another big area of work is to really support homeownership. And we do that in two ways. One is to fund the creation of new for-sale homes, again, to be a gap funder for for-sale homes, as well as what we're working on now is rolling out a citywide down payment assistance program. On the production side, we also provide gap funding for smaller scale. So we talked about multifamily rental before. These might be smaller scale rental properties like, duplexes, triplexes, people who have assembled portfolios of single family units. We also fund those. And I believe Mr. Scott talked previously, We're working in partnership with the Durham Housing Authority and with our colleagues in the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development on an employment pilot, providing construction training for DHA residents and others. Next slide.
You have 5 minutes remaining.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. And all of this is in service of the goals. All of this, the goal is to get us to those goals that we talked about last week, that you saw last week. So next slide. All these kind of big areas of activity and all of that funding that was laid out in the first chart are to get to these goals of building 1,600 new affordable rental homes, preserving 800 affordable rental homes, moving 1,700 persons experiencing homelessness into permanent housing, creating 400 homeownership opportunities. Next slide. Helping 3,000 renters and homeowners stay in their homes or improve their homes. That's some of those people-oriented programs you heard: eviction diversion, rehab, repair. And then through the investments that we're making, we're leveraging other investments, and our goal is to create $130 million in contracting opportunities for minority and women-owned enterprises, which would be part of a larger amount of private capital coming in, over 400 million, and to support 3,000 jobs as a result of construction operations and resident spending. And I think we talked about this in the last meeting, but to be really clear, this is not new job creation, but rather this is when you model and you say, if you make this amount of investment in real estate, what do the economic models tell us about the number of jobs that this supports over the life of the investment? Which could be existing jobs, some will be new jobs, but it's a mixture of both. And I believe that's it.
Perfect. I believe we have time for one question from the committee before moving into our next presentation, if anyone has a question.
Tiffany, there were several in the chat. I don't know if we want to address that or just save that.
Yeah, do you want to?
There are quite a few questions in the chat that goes back to Anthony. So I don't know if you're going to spend the time on the committee to go through some of these questions.
Yeah, we can leverage some of that time for it. Okay. Well, then let's move into the MWBE plan update.
Thank you. I'll just give an update. It's a verbal update, won't be a presentation. As you saw in the slide before about the minority and women-owned participation, MWBE goals, and we talked about those last week. And just to refresh those who may not have heard last week, that both the City of Durham and the Durham Housing Authority both have goals for minority and women-owned business participation, not just financial goals, but also goals in terms of being aggressive in seeking firms and increasing participation. And also percentages of the work that should go to minority and women-owned business firms. And so I talked about that last week. The update is that we did issue an RFP, a request for proposal, soliciting firms that were interested in helping us to seek those goals. These are firms that specialize in working with minority and women-owned businesses, providing technical assistance, doing outreach, helping us do reporting, as well as compliance as a results to minority and women-owned businesses. And so we did issue an RFP. We did have some applicants. We are
You lost audio.
You're muted.
I can't hear you.
okay.
Now you're back.
Okay, so it would be, I won't name the firm right now, but it will be, my internet connection is unstable. It's just showing up all this meeting. That it would be premature to name the firm, but the update is that we are under negotiation. And once we complete the negotiation and finalize that contract, we'll be taking that contract to the council for approval. But one of the things that did come up in my presentation to the city council last week was that we both are out, even though we don't have the firm on board, both DHA and the city do already have policies that require minority and women-owned business participation, and those are in effect. What the firm will help us to do is to help do even more outreach and provide technical assistance, and to work with Section 3 businesses and Section 3 employees. Section 3 is a HUD Act, a U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development law that requires us to go through a process to seek to have residents and business residents who own businesses in neighborhoods around projects to participate in those projects. And so there's a process for that. And that's one of the things that the firm will help us to do. So one of the things that we will do once we select that firm and have them on board is that and they will be working with the city and the housing authority. We'll have them come and do a presentation just as Moss and Ross and French West Vaughn did today. And so we will get to that point, but that's the update to share. And I thank you for that opportunity.
Perfect. Thank you for that update. And that actually leaves us with a little bit more time for the committee discussion. So I believe there was a question from Tim, was it earlier, regarding one of the earlier presentations? Did we want to?
Yeah, I know there's a ton of questions, but I was just curious about the communication strategy, because I know y'all had, I don't know if those folks are still on the call, actually. You can't see all the participants, but doesn't look like it. I just know I've heard from a lot of folks in my networks, like frustration that this is a really important project, but it also is like, in terms of the scale of the need in the city, it's going to address like a small fraction of it. And I'm just wondering how communication around this program can be like honest about that to build trust and transparent, and also enroll everyone in the city in doing what they can to help kind of fill that gap.
I'll be glad to take that question. So one of the things that you actually hit the nail on the head, and I was sharing this with the community group just last week, that to resolve the housing challenge that we have in the city of Durham would take billions of dollars with a B. We had a study by Enterprise Community Partners early on. This was about maybe about 6 years ago, that showed that we have over 10,000 residents that are paying above the 30% in housing cost of their income. So there's a great big housing challenge, and that was even before the economy, despite COVID, we were on an upturn here in increasing housing costs. So the challenge is big. The reference point is even in Willard Street apartments that we just completed was a $22.5 million project, and we have 82 units that are affordable. So if you're talking about tens of thousands of folks who are housing challenged, you can just do the math, and that's how you can get to the billions. Now, one of the things that in doing working with the housing authority is because about 40% of the subsidized housing in the city of Durham is controlled by the housing authority. And that's one of the reasons we're going through this development with the housing authority, and they're one of the key partners, because to create and preserve the affordable housing that we have, the housing authority is a key partner, and that's a foundation. So yes, you're right. There is a lot of frustration because, a lot of the questions I'm asking, why are you all building all these apartments downtown? Well, that's the market and market rate because of, the jobs that are coming in. There's only one subsidized apartment complex that's downtown other than the housing authority, and that's Willard Street. And so that's the challenge. And so we're grateful for the voters who have approved the bond referendum. It's $95 million. Yes, it's a drop in the bucket, but it's also the largest affordable housing bond in the state. So that's the challenge. So you hit the nail on the head. And I hear what you're saying about working to communicate that. We agree.
Could I chime in as well? Sorry, I was just going to say, one of the questions in the chat was asking about the 30% units, that less than 30% units that we're doing are replacing the existing ones. So I want to emphasize again that the number one priority we have is to preserve the existing units that we have that are in significant danger of going away just because of the lack of funding that we received. To expand on, I'm going to call it public housing units, is a very difficult thing to do because number one, there's something called a Fair Cloth Act, which I learned this week was actually a North Carolina legislator, congressman who passed that. But it basically capped housing authorities' ability to add new public housing units because there's a subsidy that comes with that from the federal government. However, and this is the first I've talked about this publicly, so keep it kind of quiet for a little while, but we do have the ability to add additional 30% and below units. There was some recent clarity finally given from HUD, and we'll probably be able to do at least 150 additional units down the road. It won't be part of the immediate sites that we have, i.e. the East Main Street site, but some of the future sites we'll be able to add additional public housing units. There'll be RAD units, there'll be public housing. So we're very excited about that opportunity. But the bottom line is, even once we exhaust that gap that we have, that's it. The federal government does not allow us to build new units because with it comes a very large subsidy that they would be on the hook for. A couple other things that was asked about, what if we don't get tax credits? If we don't get a 9% tax credit in 1 year, then we can switch and try to do a 4% phase in that year instead of it being a 9% phase. But one of the challenges that we have is that in Durham, we're only allowed to get 9% tax credit award, no matter how many people apply, no matter how good it is. And that's a function of the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency's structure around the awarding of tax credits across the state. We continue to lobby to try to get a change for that, particularly since we're the second highest area median income in the state of North Carolina. We think that because of that housing disparity, that there ought to be some new thought around how they do that allocation. Thank you.
We have a question from Levon Barnes on the committee. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Hey, how's everybody doing? Apologize for being late, and if it's loud, I'm driving. I just really got a question comment, right? I would love to know what the unemployment rate here in Durham is, and what full employment looks like, because I know that we're the Affordable Housing Implementation Committee, and I know everybody's doing a great job, but I can't see the long game of folks being able to stay in these units if they don't have full-time employment. I just don't see it happening, regardless of what we do, or folks still need to have jobs to stay in affordable housing. And I want the committee to always keep that in mind, that this, the units sound good, the amount of how much it may cost sounds good, but the folks who are going to be taking advantage of this are folks who are honestly at their most need right now, and they're in their most need so they can provide for their family and provide for themselves. So I just want the committee to always keep that in mind, that it's good, but we also need to have an employment plan. And that may not be a part of what we do, but we have to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the committee?
There were some in the chat from Rita.
So I put a question in the chat, and so my concern on this affordable housing issue. So I voted for the bond, and I think every day that I think about it nowadays, I regret that I did. Because when I hear the things about replacement units and not creating any new units, it just breaks my heart. I think the spirit of my vote was that I was hoping that we would be doing some kind of due diligence for those people who, like the person before me stated, who, they don't make the greatest amount of money, and they're struggling, and they've been here all their lives, and there's nothing being, nothing being created in this space for them to be here anymore. They can't afford to live in Durham. I'm a professional person. I can barely afford to live in Durham. Had I not bought my house almost 20 years ago, I wouldn't be able to buy a house in Durham with almost 3 degrees. We have to do something about this lopsided housing market here in Durham. My fear is if we continue to look at how big the problem is and how much it's going to cost, we're going to end up in a situation where there's not going to be any land or any space to do anything affordable. So, I think my challenge sounds just like the person before me. We have to start thinking about the people on the bottom with the most challenges a little bit more than what we're doing in our community.
I totally agree.
And I believe Terry.
Elder, are you ready to go over the questions in the chat? Okay. I'm gonna go up to the top. I'm not sure if Moss and Ross representatives are still here. Maybe Mr. Johnson or Ms. Lotto may know the answer to those questions.
Terry, hold on one sec. I just want to check in with Tiffany. Tiffany, we could, and the committee as a whole, whether we want to spend this time now answering questions specifically, or we can address those questions between the meetings and have a broader discussion about what we've seen so far and what we're interested in seeing in the future, which is slightly different than specific questions. I just want to put that out there to committee members.
I'd like to go back to this thing about telling stories, because I think the issue that's been brought up about why there's not more new affordable housing is a story that we need to tell. The reality is that there's been no funding for decades for the Durham Housing Authority to, improve what they have. So if we do nothing, and the story should be that we're basically rescuing what it is we have, and because we can't afford to lose that. So I think that this is the issues that's brought up. This is exactly what the communications thing should be talking about, and we're impacting people's lives who are going to be having better housing going through this process, and we're also improving our downtown corridor. So anyway, that's just I think the issues of the unemployment, these are all stories we need to tell, as well as what the successes are going to be with the employment, with the MBWE that we do get. Anyway, that's just a little bit I wanted to add.
I have a question. I noticed from past experience for applying for Section 8 with the Durham Housing Authority, and there's always been a waiting list, even when that sits on the tip of my tongue. Bodie Street Apartments came available, and I was already like 400 and some on the waiting list. And I get frustrated because it's like you all don't mix up the pot, so to speak. You all have people that been, and I know they need housing too, and I'm not saying this, but I think that there needs to be a better mixture of who gets to move into housing instead of putting people that have been out there for years. And I know y'all go through, well, do you still need this process? Are you still looking for housing? But right now, everybody's going to say they're looking for housing because of the eviction and the crisis that we've gone on for the last year. but how can we improve getting it so that it's equally distributed? Because newly homeless people, for them to get on the waiting list, they'll always be at the bottom and slowly climbing to the top. And they need to be housed now, so to speak. So how do we make it equally distributed among the people?
So there are kind of two things in there that you talked about. But from a broader perspective, we are required to handle our waiting list process a certain way by HUD. So it's really a first come, first served basis. We do a couple of processes where everyone gets an equal opportunity to get on the voucher, the housing choice voucher waiting list at the time that we open it. But then we close it because it doesn't make sense to allow the list to get to thousands and thousands of people that we'll never be able to get to. So we try to make it manageable by doing a certain amount of people. But once that application process opens up, we don't get to pick and choose who gets to go where on the list. It's based on time or a random scramble. But once that is done, then that's what happens. We don't get to say, well, you get to jump up in the line because we think you deserve it more than someone else. And it's the same thing on the public housing side. It's a first come, first served basis waiting list. And those are the rules that we have to adhere to based on HUD policy.
Hi, go ahead. Hi, I just want to say that I voted for the housing bond. I think it's a tremendously good idea. I think that Durham is booming. The wages are rising. I don't know about the rest of the country, but in Durham, they certainly are. And plus, we're one of the trial cities to have a basic universal income. So I think it's working.
Like the previous, and I know this is probably not our area, but like the previous two persons said earlier about making sure that there are jobs, things like that. Will the housing authority, or yes, the housing authority, have a way to have wraparound services available to people who have been homeless for years and need to learn how to budget their money and certain things like that?
We do have, through our resident services program, we do have limited staff and programs that allow us to do some things like that. We don't do wraparound services because we're not funded to do something like that. We usually look to other partners who could help there. In terms of the homeless, we don't deal with the homeless at all. We don't do with emergency housing. That Karen Lotto spoke about the COC, the continuum of care. That's where homeless individuals are actually addressed. We do have a partnership with that COC where we offer a limited amount of vouchers for people that are homeless that are referred to our program by them. And we also have a limited number of vouchers, a limited number of public housing units that are going to be designated for homeless individuals. But other than that, homelessness is being handled through the continuum of care in the housing, the HSAC. I'm sorry, Karen, help me on the acronym HSAC. I've drawn a complete
Homeless
blank.
Services Advisory Committee.
Correct.
We have about 5 minutes left on the agenda for the committee discussion. So if there are any other items the committee would like to bring up, we can chat about those. I see Lucia.
Mr. Scott, could you talk a little bit about how the relocation plan was communicated to residents?
Well, relocation is really done on almost on a one-on-one basis. So we have a relocation company that is working with us to provide relocation services to our families. We had talked about it all during the process that we were going to do relocation, But now that we're getting, the rubber is meeting the road, we have a relocation company that's been brought in. They work directly with the families to help them in figuring out what size unit they need, what particular wants that they have in terms of where they'd like to go, and our staff as well. And they work with them directly on the actual literal physical relocation process itself. So for example, we've had people that have just recently started moving into the Willard Street apartments. I think we had 8 families that have just moved in this past week, and there's another 4 to go. And we'll continue to do that type of work. We pay for all relocation costs, including utility hookups and things of that nature.
Any other questions from committee? If not, Terry, if there are any questions that we can cover with the remaining time from the chat, that would be great.
I'm sorry, could you just speak up just a little? I didn't hear you.
Oh, if there were any other questions from the chat that you were going through earlier that we can cover with these additional few minutes, that would be great.
Okay, this is for Mr. Scott. How many new lower AMI will be created, not counting the ones being replaced?
Right, we've already talked about that. So in our existing plans, there are no new ones, but as I mentioned earlier, we will see probably an increase of about 150 or so new low AMI units.
Okay.
If I may, Terry, I apologize. If I may jump in, this is Karen Lotto. I would note that we also have non-DHA production that we are supporting with this program. And we will be generating, as a general rule for our multifamily investments, the city requires 20% of the units be affordable to households at or below 30% of area median income. There are some occasions when that doesn't work, but that is our typical requirement. So we will be generating some additional 30% area median income units. That way, I will note, because I know there were a number of questions about the chat and whether they will be adequate to meet the need. And as Mr. Johnson already indicated before, no. I mean, it will help. It will expand the supply, but it will not be in any way, shape, or form be sufficient to meet the need and the demand that we have for very low income people for affordable homes. Thank you, Terry.
Sure. And Mr. Scott, if these questions have already been answered, feel free to say exactly what you just did. What happens to projects if DHA doesn't receive tax credits as anticipated?
Right, I did address that a little earlier. If it's not a 9% tax credit, we may have the option to switch it to a 4%, and then we can apply for a 9% of another phase on some of the sites.
Okay. Let me just going down. I just want to make sure that people did have their questions answered. What is the AMI breakdown?
I covered that in my presentation as well. I think that came up before I got to that slide. In Durham right now, it's $86,400 for a family of 4.
Okay. All right. Well, Mrs. Scott, did you address? Could you say more about the decision not to add additional 30% AMI units?
Yes, I did address that.
Okay, so you all are just on the ball here. Okay. Ms. Otto, I'm not sure if you're ready to handle this. It's in reference to the down payment assistance program.
Ma'am?
I'll read it for you, and it may be covered a little later when we put the questions and answers together. A minor question on the down payment assistance program. Reading the RFP, it looks like the purchase price limit is around $250,000 based on HUD home guidance. How will folks be able to find decent homes for sale in that price market, for that price in the current market?
That is a very good question. There are homes in Durham in that price range. One of the things that, and I should say, one of the challenges we have is that folks need to be in an affordable situation when they buy their home. So if you're earning less than 80% of area median income and you're buying into a home that's much more than $250,000, you are not necessarily going to be in that place. So that is the challenge that we have. How far can you get with the down payment assistance that we're offering? Right now, we're rolling it out initially. We're going to see how it goes and see if we need to make course corrections as we move along based upon what our buyers begin to experience.
Thank you. Are you ready to speak anything about the income eligibility requirement for the down payment assistance program?
Yes, you have to earn less to be at or less than 80% of area median income to be eligible for the program.
Okay, so based on what I've
Excuse me, what is that figure, Karen? How much is that?
Oh gosh, I don't have that in front of me. I am.
What's the area median income?
We shared it. It was in the last week's presentation. Let me see if I can pull up those numbers and give you a sense of what that looks like. Hang on, I'm just opening a presentation.
Family of 4 was 86.4.
I don't have it in front of me. It ranges from 100% of median is probably that 86.4. I think 80% is a little bit lower, and it goes down to in the 30s or in the 40s for a one-person household, and then up from there. But I'm afraid it's not in front of me.
So it's around 70,000.
This is Reginald Johnson. We can send out the chart again. It was actually in the presentation that I did last week, but we can keep that, send that chart out again.
And Mr. Scott, I think this is the last one. Did you discuss how the relocation was communicated to the public housing residents?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Thank you, Juliet. Juliet just put the chart from the previous presentation on the screen so one can see. This was from the presentation that I did last week. So one can see at 80% AMI for a family of 4 is $72,700. This is household income. If you remember, I talked about that last week. Just for reference, a family of 3 at 50% is $40,950, and 30% AMI for a family of 4 is a household income of $27,250. And Mr. Scott, if my understanding is the residents of the housing authority, by most standards, fall in the 30% or below category.
Definitely below category. Our average income for public housing is around $12,000.
So hopefully that answers that question, and thank you.
Okay. So it looks like I've gone through the majority of the chat questions that are still standing out there that I didn't know had been answered, but I believe that is it.
We're out of time for that right now. So I think we'll just thank you for that. And we'll take a look at what else is in the chat and try to formulate some questions for anything that's outstanding. I just want to thank you all for joining us this evening and everyone that presented. This information is very helpful. I know the committee knows that the next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, May 6th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. I want to note a few points of information for everyone that's on the call. If people want, other than the committee members, if other people want to get a notice of upcoming city meetings, including these Affordable Housing Implementation Committee meetings, you can write to the clerk, Diana Schreiber, at durhamnc.gov. I put that in the chat. The presentations and documents from this meeting and also the meeting that was held on April 1st will be available on the Community Development Department website that Juliet posted and I just put in the chat again. The proposed meeting schedule was sent as an attachment to committee members, and we'll get a chance to discuss that next month. But as you can see, at this point, we're proposing we meet in May, the 1st of June, first week of June, first week of September, and first week of October. In October, we will set the meeting schedule for 2022. So things will become more fixed next year. We can always add additional meetings, but that's where we're at. For people that want to watch this or future meetings, or also the April 1st meeting, they are on the city's YouTube site, which I put in the chat. And then lastly, again, we'll take a look at the comments in the chat and try to address them before the next meeting. At this point, I would like to thank everyone for joining us and entertain a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Levon, and I think Laura might have seconded. So all those in favor, and we'll see you next month. Thanks.
Aye.
Take